right, welcome back to another episode of Bright Brains. Today's returning guest is someone with a truly rare perspective on the inner workings of national security and leadership in high-stakes environments. Jeremy Duffy is a former NSA employee who spent years navigating the complexities of intelligence work while advocating for authentic leadership and systematic change. He's also the author of Are You Listening?, a powerful book that challenges how we think about leadership, workforce culture, and the importance of truly hearing the people around us. From cybersecurity and AI to privacy and self-advocacy, Jeremy brings deep insight and lived experience to the conversation. I'm excited to welcome him to the show. Thank you for being here, Jeremy.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Isaac.
Awesome. So I know I just gave you the introduction, but just reintroduce yourself to the people. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I guess for the people who haven't heard episode 60, I guess just tell us a little bit about your background, get people up to speed and about who
No
you
worries.
are.
So the biggest thing, of course, is that I did work for the National Security Agency for quite a while, 16 years, and it was an interesting and frustrating experience, mostly because making any kind of positive change, especially anything that helped anybody, in the real world, was just about impossible. The only time I felt that I really was a one role that I had where I went to teach what's called operations security, or OPSEC, to the military, to government contractors and various federal agencies. And the whole principle behind that is that you're giving away more information than you realized. And when you do that, it gives bad guys the means to harm you. And a famous example of that would be when the Pentagon orders 300 pizzas in the middle of the night. Reporters can figure out pretty quickly that something's going down.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. They had a name for that. The journalists, they call it the pizza line or something like that, or like the journalists would know when something was happening at the
Yeah, they
Pentagon.
call it pizza int, because you know how they have well, they call it the pizza meter, I mean, officially, but we call it pizza int because we just put int on the end of everything, and that's, intelligence, like signals intelligence, SIGINT, image intelligence, IMINT, that kind of thing.
Shout out to our sponsor, Bad Product, the modern lifestyle brand that specializes in streetwear apparel and accessories. Their dedication to values such as self-care promote an optimistic vibe that is sure to spread awareness, and we are always happy to endorse a small business that ultimately shares common beliefs. Go check out Bad Product for yourselves. They stay with multiple collections, great deals, and specials. Simply use our coupon code VAGABARD for 10% off your final purchase. For the best quality, choose the Bad Product. We appreciate the support, and without further ado, please do stay tuned and enjoy the show.
Yeah, so the internet, man, right now is kind of like the Wild West. You really never know what you're clicking on. There's so many scammers and con men out here. There's so many people out here who want to harm you. And the internet, it seems like you're kind of just swimming in shark infested waters, at least to me. But
Potentially.
yeah, but you're working on something called LifeSec, which
Mhm.
is, I'm not sure if that's a word that you coined or not.
Yeah. Well, I found out there are other organizations that use that term, but I just named it based on the OPSEC for operations security, because even when I was teaching OPSEC, one of the biggest problems that I had with the way we taught it is that it was really boring and people couldn't see how to apply it to their real lives. And I thought that if we changed the way we taught it, people would be able to internalize it and use it in their real lives, which would help make them secure everywhere, not just at work. And that's the principle behind LifeSec. I've technically been doing this for, 15, 20 years. But now I've given it a name. I've put together an article. I saw that there was a strong need for that in the current political climate. And so I tried to fill it the best I can. I have a new briefing. I'm going to try to get out there and share that with people. I want to get it up on YouTube, but I got a little more tweaking to do, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Now, before we hop into this, you said this is important, especially during the current political climate.
Mhm.
I would think it was this important, just period. But what
It
is it
is.
right now about the current political climate that you think is more important?
Well, if somebody if somebody knows that you are not a legal resident, or somebody that you love is not a legal resident, or they think you're not, that
Hmm.
can draw attention to you. And as we've seen, it's not particularly important to the administration if you actually are illegal or not. And
Yeah.
then, and whether or not you are logically in the right is irrelevant if you're in the back of the van bound and shipped off to another country in a gulag somewhere. If you are a trans individual and you don't want people to know because that could cause immense problems for you. For instance, they're trying to make it illegal for children to be trans by jailing their parents. There was a bill in Montana yesterday that was up for vote that fortunately didn't pass, but people are scared and they have good reason to be. So I want them to feel like there is some control they have, some way to protect themselves.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about the whole illegal immigrant thing, which is interesting because I've actually interviewed a guy who grew up here undocumented and talked about his struggles. But yeah, that never dawned on me about how the internet could be used to round them up and basically, kick them out the country. But here's something else too, learned about recently. So, some of these states, they are making it more difficult for women to get abortions and things like that. And
Same
in
thing.
some of these
Yep.
states, if they find out they had an abortion, then
Or
they can
think they
be
did.
jailed. Yeah. And one thing is, I think some of these apps, they have like these period tracking apps. They think that the data from those apps, I'm not sure if this has actually happened or something that could happen, but the government could get data from these period tracking apps or maybe just health apps in general, and they can maybe kind of tell if a woman is pregnant or not,
That is correct.
which is, yeah, kind of scary.
It's I'm not saying that happens. I'm saying the potential is very clearly there. People don't
Mm.
understand the power of small bits of data, especially when combined or used by a deep aggressor.
Mm. There was something I read on your website. You had wrote about a training lesson that you have received when in the NSA. It was called Pizza Palace.
Oh, sure, sure.
And yeah, and it was about what an organization could do if they had your full data profile. So could you delve into that? What is a full data profile and what can an organization do with that?
So think of like the word dossier being just a collection of all the information about you that can be discovered. That would be something usually a spy would put together, or a private eye, or in the case of the ACLU who made that pizza palace video, the government, or what they imagined the government would have. And I can't really speak to what the government does have, but I do know that large corporations like LexisNexis, Facebook, and others like that are building those now. They have them now. They have information about your age, your gender, your sexuality, your work history, your uh, where you've lived, and your preferences, your purchases, those kinds of things. So what can you do with that information? Pretty much anything, really, because I can easily push on your boundaries. I can attack your weak points. I can paint you to look like something you're not. For instance, if I had access to that uh, 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 menstruation cycle software, and I could see your records, and I could see that it stopped, and it's only because you stopped tracking it, but I could make it look like, oh, you had a hidden abortion. It just
Mm.
paints a picture, and it's easy to paint the picture with little bits of information, especially if some of them are verifiable, because our brains fill gaps, right? Like when you see a coat on the wall in the dark and you think there's a person standing there, it's filling the gaps for you. There isn't anybody there. But I mean, I hope. But one example I use, and I don't like to give these examples without triggers because they're kind of terrifying. But if I knew, for example, that you had posted, Isaac, that your spouse, I don't even know if you're married, this is just a for instance, you were having trouble because she thought you were cheating. It was a big misunderstanding. You got it all cleared up. Everything's cool. But now knowing that, and if I found your address or looked it up or bought it from one of these LexisNexis choice point, whatever, I could send a flower scented lipstick letter to your house under the name of some girl in a nice cursive script that could ruin your marriage.
Hmm.
Just
I see
because
what
you
you
pissed
mean.
me off online, you said something I didn't like.
Hmm. Yeah, that's wild. So yeah, definitely staying safe on the internet and being careful with the information that we spread is definitely something we need to be aware about. So on your website, you had like several chapters, and I figure we can just go through, talk
Sure.
about some of the risks. One of these is that you said the risk of visibility. I think we kind of just touched on that with the Pizza Palace, but what is the risk of visibility?
Well, the risk of visibility is when people post things and they think that the people who would be the worst possible person to see it won't see it. Like I
Hmm.
post a thing, oh, that's not going to my boss. Well, says who? Because somebody who sees your name and can check you on LinkedIn, knows where you work, might be able to call your boss and point it out to them, put it right in front of their face. Or maybe your boss is part of your friend's network. I have seen Facebook fired, we used to call it, post where somebody was complaining about the boss and the boss says, hey, I guess you forgot you added me on here. Don't bother coming into work on Monday. And yes, I'm serious.
Wow, yeah, that's crazy.
But
Yeah,
yeah, you have to remember everyone is online. And
mhm.
what you post can go anywhere. There's no guarantee that it's not going to go to the worst possible person you can think of, whether that be your ex or a stalker or just a hate group or whatever.
Yeah, I've thought of, I remember a couple of examples of just being on the internet that I've seen where somebody shared something and it came back to bite them. One of them was this girl. She had just got a internship at NASA, and she went on Twitter and she said something like, fuck yeah, I just got my internship. And then somebody replied to her and was like, watch your language. And then she replied back, was like, I don't got to watch what I say, fuck you. Long story short, the guy that replied to her was some bigwig at NASA,
Right.
and she lost the internship. So that's one that sucks. I think there was some outcry, and she was able to get that internship back. But
But
another
only
one,
because of the outcry. I mean, let's be honest. If it wasn't for
yeah,
the outcry, she would have silently lost that opportunity, and that would have been the end of it.
yeah, exactly. Another thing, there was this woman. She was like an Instagram model. She had like a ton of followers. She posted a picture of herself at a laundromat doing laundry, and some weirdo, some stalker or something, knew where that laundromat was, went there and killed her.
Yep.
And it was just something innocuous as taking a picture of a laundromat, and then some guy killed her. So it's like you never know who's looking.
Well, and you should kind of assume the worst. I mean, honestly,
Mhm.
it's a risk scenario, and I didn't say this already, so I'll say it now. But everything I recommend is completely your choice. Everybody has to decide how much risk they're willing to take and how real they feel the risk is. So I'm going to give examples and I'm going to give tips, and it's not about scaring people; it's about arming them to defend themselves by making an informed choice about what to share, when to share, and how much to share, but especially not to share more than they realize, which we'll talk about next. But the key is never assume you're safe because you think the worst possible person that might see something won't see it because they might.
Gotcha. So I always assume the worst. What would you say to like somebody who maybe makes a living online? Like I mentioned, the Instagram model, or like maybe a famous YouTuber or something like that. How, because they have to share themselves in order
They
to
do.
gain a following. What kind of advice would you give to them?
Well, for one, go through the whole course, read all the pages, and then internalize what I say. I literally think about this stuff all the time. I carry it with me. It's part of my mentality. It's who I am. If I'll give you an example. So when my third kid was being born, my wife was in severe labor, like right there. We were running into the hospital, and the lady at the front says, okay, what's your social security number? And I said, why do you need that? My wife's screaming behind me. And I'm like, no, you can't have the social. This is important. Honey, calm down for a second. I'm kidding. It wasn't quite that bad. But They said, we'll work it out later. And later we did. And I said, I'm not giving it to you because you don't need it. Right? Because I know the more information that is out there in the more places it's out there, the more risk it is of being lost, shared, traveling somewhere else, combined with other information. So it protects you better if you limit the spread as much as possible. So never volunteer that information. And the key is you have to think about that all the time. You have to be on guard for it, not like it to an exhausting degree, but recognize the signs. It's like when you're looking for a phishing email, you learn to look for the signs. Well, when somebody asks you for information, you say, hold on a second, why do you need this? And that's not something most people are thinking about. I want you to think about that. I want you to always ask, why are you asking me for that information? Do you actually need it? And if you don't, pound sand.
All right. Now, here's something about like you mentioned about having all your info out there. It seems like every other week you hear about some corporation getting hacked and losing their data. Like it'll say something like Target got hacked and all the emails and user info was leaked. It'll say something like, Apple got hacked and all their user info and email has got leaked. And they'll send like a little notice out saying you should change your password and things like that. So one, my question is, this seems to happen a lot. It seems like a lot of these corporations are always getting hacked.
It's probably a lot more than you know.
Yeah. Why is that? Why isn't their security better?
Well, for the longest time, I used to say that every breach is negligence, and it was true. There was never a case where it was clever hackers, ever. It was always security negligence. Now, security is getting a little tighter, and the hackers are getting a little more sophisticated, and they're hitting up individual people in the organizations, in spear phishing, whaling, etc., to get an in to that organization. Because if they can get in, they can spread and they can do what they need to do and they can work fairly fast. So that's why there's so much phishing now, because security has gotten to the point where it's good enough that the weak point is people. And way back when, hacking used to be about the laughs to spread the virus as far as they could, as quickly as they could. And that time has long since disappeared. Now it's all about the money. This is business. Hacking is business. So everyone who has a website, everyone who has a business online is a target, and they're being attacked all the time. So it's a constant struggle. Hang on a second, I'm gonna relocate this cat.
All right.
Anyway.
All right. Now, when you get that notice that some company's been hacked and they say change your password, does changing your password even do anything, or is it too late?
It depends. So the key is like what kind of account you have, right? So if you change your password, you still have access to the account. That means that what was stolen is useless to them. Now, if they had used it already, okay, they got some use out of it, but a lot of hacks, they really don't work that way. They gather information and they sell that information. The other people use it. It's usually not all a one-stop shop when it comes to these kinds of attackers, based on everything I've read. So it might be months before somebody actually tries to use that account. So there's value there. But the most important thing is if your password very clearly suggests a pattern or is the same in multiple places, you really have to change all of that. It's one of the reasons why having a password manager might be a good idea. I don't personally use one because there's a big downside to it. And with multi-factor authentication, that whole problem essentially goes away. So the most important thing to know when it comes to password security is set up multi-factor authentication. So if you have an authenticator app or it sends you a text, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. All right, then. So what is the reality of these hackers? Are they like just some guy in their basement, or is it like more sophisticated than that? I know like in movies
way more sophisticated than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The vast majority of hackers are actual businesses. They're groups of people. They have organization. They might be state sponsored. So China, Russia, other adversaries, they have cyber teams who attack our industry to disrupt, to steal, to espionage, all that sort of thing.
All right. I actually want to delve more into that, but we'll come back to that later. Um, so the next chapter you had was risk of oversharing and accidental oversharing. I kind of
Yeah.
feel like we kind of touched on that already. Is there more you want to say about the oversharing thing?
Well, I mean, there's a story I like to tell about a coworker that I had when I worked in the OPSEC office. He told me about a commander who didn't want an OPSEC program, thought it was too much work and not enough benefit. So he said, fine. And he went back to the office and he looked up the commander online because they all have their family bios like, oh, Commander blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah, with his wife and his kids. And here's their names and where they go to school. So he found out that the oldest daughter went to school at the University of Maryland. It was just a few miles from our office at the time. And it had her picture and it had her school schedule. She was completely an open book. So he grabbed a buddy and a camera and then went down to the school and they waited for her. When she came out of one of the buildings, she sat down on a bench. He sat down way on the other side of the bench, nowhere near her, didn't talk to her or anything. But he stood there and he made a little peace sign and had his picture taken next to the commander's daughter. And then he went to the commander and threw the picture on the desk and said, that's why you need an OPSEC program. And
Wow. That
that's
took some
gutsy as
balls.
that is gutsy as hell.
Yeah.
But the way the story was told to me, it ended well, and he agreed that they needed an OPSEC program. So good for him. But I mean, that's a hell of a way to make a point. But the key is, it
Yeah.
really is that easy. So people don't understand that these little bits of information and just posting freely without any care for what's out there puts you at risk, which is why the important lessons are to be more general about your information. Like if somebody asks where you're from, you don't give them your address, you give them a much broader case. For example, if you're overseas, they probably only want to know if you're American or not. That's
Hmm.
probably all they care about. If they want to know which state you're from, which I can't imagine, but if, say you were over in Texas or Wyoming or something, and they say, "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Washington." And if somebody in Washington asks, because maybe I'm off visiting family on the other side of the state or whatever, "Oh, are you from Spokane?" "No, I'm over Seattle area." That's as close as I get. I won't narrow it down except for people in my neighborhood, and even then, never to the street or anything.
Hmm.
Just as little specificity as possible. You speak generally, not only to protect yourself, because being overly specific in your stories, in your examples, in the things you talk about makes you very, very boring. So double benefit.
All right, then. All right. So be vague about the information that you share online.
Yeah, you don't have
So,
to lie or anything. Just give them the most general, correct answer. And for the accidental oversharing, I don't want to gloss over that because that's pretty important too. The example I like to give is the guy who, well, let's just be blunt. Let's say he was watching porn in the hotel the night before a big briefing, and then he goes to the
mhm.
conference and he plugs in his laptop and it starts playing again in front of the
Oh,
crowd.
wow.
Because stuff like that happens. And the
Hmm.
key, or you're texting with mom and your girlfriend and you send the sexy text to mom instead. Oops. Stuff like that happens. So what I recommend is having clear divisions between stuff to prevent accidents. When you're on your computer, you can set up a second account and log into the work account when doing work to prevent those kinds of problems. And then use multiple browsers. Say one is used for internet, one is used for business, private business, that kind of thing. Same with your messaging apps. I have at least three emails. I actually have more, but and I use them for different things. I use four different browsers typically. One for any account you log into, one for browsing the internet in general, and that's my strongest browser, which is Brave right now. One that I only use for business, things that are tied to my reputation, my name, my business name, that kind of thing. And then one more for just farting around and doing specific searching on deep web stuff, that kind of thing. And that
Gotcha. All right.
separation simplifies the problem because then you don't have to think about, okay, which one am I in? As soon as you see it, okay, this one is only used for this. You train yourself that way, a lot less likely to to have an accident.
All right, then. So the next chapter was elicitation risk.
That's correct.
All right. So what is elicitation risk?
So elicitation is me tricking you into giving me your data, and it's actually pretty easy to do. I tricked. So my wife's friend was being harassed by. She thinks her ex-husband's new wife, but she couldn't be sure. She couldn't prove it because Facebook wouldn't give an IP address or anything. So I just said, okay, well, here's what you do. I'm going to write a post on my website that says I'm going to be working with this girl. She's going to be, a partner in my business, but I don't know anything about her. If you do, let me know. And then I said, go to your Facebook and post a link to my post that says, hey, I need to work with this guy. Real big opportunity for me. Please go give a good word. It was a trap, complete trap, a lure. And in a few minutes, I got a comment on my page that was all, she's this devil, she's a slut, blah, 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 etc. All the same stuff that was posted on her Facebook, all the mean things that this girl was saying, basically just trying to ruin her. And on my webpage, it's my webpage. So I had the IP address of the person who posted the comment. So we gave it to her to give to the police. It was super easy to do. And that's called social engineering. So when you're online and you see these posts that are asking you questions that lead to private information, for example, your birth month is the bird that you see that is your month is your bird. Which one is it? Right? They're probably not trying to get your birthday. But if I were trying to trick somebody into giving their birthday, that's what I would do. I would check on say Reddit, and I can look at their profile and it'll tell me where they spend the most time, which subreddits, and I know their username. So I could easily put together a couple of posts that seem like something they would respond to, which is easy to tell because you can see what they comment on the most, and then start to pick up that information. One time I do the birthday, one day I do the birth month, one day I do the year, or stuff like that. And I start to build that profile. Depending on how angry and motivated I am, I could start to pull that out. But what's a lot more common is that people will just ask you to fill out a form online, and people fill it in because there's blank spaces and they don't like the blank spaces, I guess. But every time you do that, you're giving more information than you have to. So I usually recommend you just click the go or sign up button without filling in anything, because it will highlight which ones are actually required. And then if you don't agree with what's there and you don't think they really need that information, like a birthday, like, why are you asking me for my birthday? Why do you need that information? Because as far as I'm concerned, you only need a birthday. You just want to know if I'm over 13 because of various laws or whatever. So I put in a birthday that's over 13. And I have to say, take this advice with a grain of salt. Make sure you're, kosher when it comes to the legality and morality. I can't speak for your situation, but I can definitely say that I have given fake information to websites for certain things when I know they didn't actually need that information.
Gotcha. Yeah, I remember reading reports of people on Facebook having their information stolen because they would fill out those little quizzes,
right.
Those little funny little Facebook quizzes. And it turns out that was a phishing scheme. And a lot of people had their identity stolen just from filling out those little funny games. So
exactly.
I guess it's just like, don't trust anything. All right. So,
well, at the very least, don't give up your information easily and know who you're talking to. It's like that Harry Potter book. Don't trust anything where you don't know where it keeps its brain. Right.
I'm not familiar with Harry Potter, but
oh well, all right. In either case, it was bad news.
Gotcha. All right. So the next one was aggregation risk.
Yep. And
so
we've
what
definitely talked about that a little bit. These dossiers, these clusters of information about you. I mean, you've heard of doxing, right? It's all the same thing. And in back when Al Qaeda was huge, they found a Al Qaeda safe house in Manchester, England, where they found a manuscript. Essentially, it was a how to stalk and attack people. And it gave detailed instructions for hunting down where they lived, where their friends were, what they ate, when they ate, all as much information as possible, because all of that information could be useful in planning an attack and making sure it would succeed. This is where me watching your profile and seeing that post about you having trouble with the wife, or you're struggling to drink. You're proud of your 5-year Alcoholics Anonymous pin. Now I know you're at risk. I send you a wine of the month club when I know your family's out of town, and I could ruin your life just that easily.
Yeah, that's
So
wild.
the more information I have, and the easier it becomes, even down to just if your neighbors hate you and they know you're leaving on vacation, they could do almost anything. I saw a post in the neighborhood group recently where somebody had turned on their hose and left it running for 11 days. And they ended up using about 40,000 gallons of water. Their bill was
Wow.
nearly $1,000.
Oh, wow, man. Yeah. All right.
And
So,
it's not hard to turn on a hose.
yeah, it ain't. All right. So, I know when I was a kid, my parents, whenever we would go on vacation, they would say, leave the lights on. Or I remember one time my dad bought like a little timer that would turn the lights on and off at certain times. And I used to think that was overkill, but apparently I guess it's good advice.
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
you've seen Home Alone, right?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, where he
So a long
has
time
the
ago, but
fake
yeah.
party and things are moving around because it
Hmm.
scares people off. They don't want to. They don't want to hit the place when it's full when there's people there. That's risky.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, then. So last but not least, you had something called a photosec. So what is photosec?
Well, photosec is simply the practice and art of scanning photos for information. So the example that I give is about this Japanese pop star who is very similar to the example you gave before. She had a stalker because she's a famous pop star, and
Hmm.
she posted on Instagram all the time, just click, doing this, that, the whatever. And the problem is that the quality of the cameras is so high, you can zoom in to see all kinds of details like what's in the background, where is she. And she was careful to make sure there was nothing in the background that identified, but the reflection of her eye showed a sign that the guy recognized at a specific train station. And because she posted it at X time, he knew when she went through that train station as part of her commute. So he was there the next day watching and waiting for her. And then he followed her home and all that sort of thing. So she survived, by the way. I just want to be clear, but she
It's good
was
to know.
attacked. And
Yeah.
that's what it took because people don't realize how much information photos give away. What's in the background? What can you see? If you're a huge advocate of LGBTQ and you don't want people to know that except for the times you want them to know that, you got to be careful about what you hang on your wall, what sits on your desk. What kind of symbols do you have? What kind of flags do you have? What kind of books are on your shelf and what are the titles? Those can all be seen. I can't even tell you the number of times I've seen people post their fingerprints on the internet because they took a picture of a bug or a rock in their hand. They said, look at this pretty flower. Okay, nice flower, and all 5 of your fingerprints. Happens all the time.
Yeah,
So,
I remember you
yeah,
told us last time about the Australian kids who were 3D printing like some kind of glove of
they were just using
fingerprints.
gummy bear candies to make
Oh,
fake
gummy bear
fingerprints.
candy.
And then
Yeah.
their friends would check them in by pressing the gummy bears onto the scanners.
Yeah, that's wild. You know what really drove home for me the power that photos on the internet have? There's this guy on TikTok. He's a geo guesser. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Yep,
those,
I
but his
have.
name is Geo Rainbow.
Yeah.
And he just like, if somebody posts a picture of them standing next to a tree, he can find out like what kind of tree that is, where it grows, and then like he can like look at the type of telephone pole in the background and the street signs, and he
There's a
can
whole
like
subreddit for
pinpoint.
it, actually.
Yeah, he can pinpoint exactly where that person is, and it's really crazy. Like he's really good at it, like scary good. You know, if I was working for the NSA, I would hire him or something. But
Well,
you
all I
know,
can say is that they are not unfamiliar with the concept of image analysis. I'll just put it that
mhm.
way. But the bottom line is that It's really easy to get to a decent level of that yourself just by learning to pay attention. If you look at the reflections, what can you see? If you look at the details, how far can you zoom in? How clear can you make that? Can you read that piece of mail that's on the table behind somebody? And what does that tell you? It could tell you their address, for one. And if, for instance, you have a key visible at all in a photo, that key can be replicated in most cases, like a house key, because it's just a bunch of blades that correspond to some numbers. That's all it is a code. And you can tell by the height of the tooth what that number is.
Man, that's wild. Huh. Yeah. Have you ever seen that happen before? Like somebody like copying a key based on a picture?
Some
Because
researchers
that's
did it, and they
yeah.
were able to take a photo at an angle from about 200 feet away and still able to replicate that key and make it work.
Dang, that's
I
crazy,
have a link
man.
to it on my webpage. It's a pretty cool study, and it was also like 12 years ago that they did this. So
Wow.
it's not
Yeah,
exactly
so
hard.
it's yeah, so it's probably a lot easier now. All
Yeah.
right. So one thing I was thinking about, with all this learning about viruses and cybersecurity. And that's is antivirus software. Is that important to have? I know growing up there was Norton and
Uh,
other antiviral software. Is that does that actually effective? Because to me it seems like I'm paying a lot and I don't really seem like it's doing anything.
I personally feel it's kind of a scam. Everyone that I trust says that a little bit of caution plus whatever's built into your computer is fine for
Hmm.
most things. You just got to be careful where you go online, what you download, and whether you run it or not. Give a little bit of thought to, okay, where's the software coming from? And is this a safe thing to do? Is this something a lot of people use? So maybe hopefully somebody would notice if something was wrong with it. And, that kind of thing. Has it been out a long time? Just a little bit of thought, right? Plus, when
Hmm.
you're browsing, make sure that you're using a secure browser that's not easy to hack. For example, I told you I use Brave as my primary browser because it has ad tracking and ad blocking all built in. So the tracking blocker, ad blocker, and various other kinds of attacks are automatically defended against. Plus, you can get plugins from the Electronic Freedom Foundation, the Privacy Badger, and some other things. Because it turns out that the things that invade your privacy and the things that are security risk are often related.
All right, then. So one thing you touched on, you said you have kids, and I know nowadays everywhere you go, every kid seems to have a iPad in their hand.
Yeah.
You go to a restaurant, the kids have iPads. You get on the bus, the kids have iPads. You're in school, the kids have iPads. These Generation Z kids, they're online all the time. So what should we be telling children about how to stay safe on the internet, and what can parents do to keep their children safe on the internet?
Well, for one, limiting their access to it to make sure that they're only using it in places where they can be seen and not doing shifty things. So, no tech in the bedrooms is a common rule. No tech at night, also a common rule. You can set up your router. A lot of them will have uh, a kid parental control where you can shut them off after a period of time so they don't even work. They can play games, but they can't get online. You can um, you have to teach them because when all is said and done, no matter what you do to your kids, you need their cooperation. If they don't want to cooperate with you, you're not going to get anything accomplished because they'll find a way around you. They'll go to the neighbor's house or, whatever. But those kinds of things. Another is if you have a good router that has a regular and a guest network, keeping the kids' devices off your network will keep you safe because if they get hacked, the biggest consequence is they can steal their Roblox bucks, I guess. They won't get into your computer, they won't get to your banking records, they won't get to you.
One thing I've heard about lately is the rise of sextortion
Yeah.
among young boys. So, like, a boy will be online, an attractive woman or a girl will hit him up and say, "Hey, can you send me a dick pic?" And
Girl.
yeah, yeah, girl in quotations, and the guy will send it, and the person will then extort them and say, hey, unless you give me $500 by this date, I'm going to send this to your parents. And there have been boys who have committed suicide over this,
Yes, there
which
have.
I had to say. So, what are your thoughts on this rising trend of sextortion, and how do we keep people safe from that?
Well, the first thing you do is make sure that your kids know that this is a thing. Teach them to
Uh,
distrust. And in the newer generation, that seems a lot easier because I think they're raised that way. They know how much bullshit there is out there. But make sure they know. Make sure that they know that the scammers are coming after them, that not to believe what they see, not to freak out about that thing, but also be the kind of parent that the kid wouldn't hide that from you as much as you possibly can. Don't freak out about people making mistakes. People make mistakes, right? Especially kids, because they just don't believe it until something happens. So if at all possible, you've got to convince them that, look, no matter what happens, you got to tell me because I can help, right? I will help you fix what's wrong. Because doing it on your own, they'll just string you along and it'll get worse. And hell, show them that one episode of Black Mirror. Jesus, if you want to traumatize them, ooh.
yeah, which episode was that? It's been a while since I've
I
seen that
honestly
show.
can't remember the name, but there was some
Yeah.
kid who was being extorted, and it just kept escalating. At first, it was sit in a car, then it was drive the getaway car, then it was kill the guy that robbed the bank with you.
Oh man. Yeah.
Just
I
got
think I
worse
remember that
and
one.
worse
Yeah.
and worse.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you've got to do everything in your power to convince them, and they often won't listen to you. So show them stories, show them YouTube videos. Try to get other people to tell them the same things you tell them, because we so frequently will listen to someone else rather than people we know and trust. I don't understand it, but it's true.
Gotcha. It seems like it's a lot of work to protect yourself online. Part of me wonders, is there something like the government can do to just make our lives safer? You know?
To a degree, I mean, to a degree, the NSA is already doing that, right?
Mhm.
Um, and making companies responsible for their breaches and the consequences of that pushes them to keep you safer. For example, you ever notice how quickly a credit card company will call you when there's a charge they don't recognize? They're
Mhm.
not doing that because they like you. They're doing that because they're on the hook for the money by
Gotcha.
law. And if that
Mhm.
law wasn't there, they wouldn't care. So those
Yeah.
kinds of things for sure. But the problem is that when all is said and done, nobody can prevent you from making a mistake. Nobody can prevent you from helping a hacker out. So that's why I recommend you internalize these ideas of constantly watching your posts. What am I giving away? What are people actually learning from what I post, what I say, who I mention? Am I giving too much detail? Is that really necessary? For instance, I often use the word spouse instead of wife, not because I'm trying to hide that, but because it's not necessary. I don't tend to reference how many total kids I have, what their ages are, what their sexes are, or anything else about them. I can say I have a kid who's LGBTQ. Didn't tell you which one, didn't tell you which type, because it's not necessary. All right. And that's enough. And once you learn and internalize this, it just becomes second nature and you become safer by default. You're a lot less likely to have a problem because you live LifeSec, which sounds cheesy, but just that idea. As an example, I have a coworker who watched my briefing, my test briefing for this, and he said that he had a picture of himself and he had big sunglasses on, and because of that, he was able to see that in the sunglasses it showed something that he didn't want to post online, so he had to retake that photo. But he only did that because he thought about it, because he had learned that that kind of thing was possible. So pay attention, know what kind of scams are out there, listen to your security people. But in the end, it's you that has to at least learn the basics and internalize them.
So, speaking of people being unsafe on the internet, let's talk about Signalgate. What's
Oh,
your
yeah.
whole take on this?
Okay, so they're using various types of spin to make it sound like less of a problem than it is, but there is I can't say with confidence, because I'm not part of the Intel community anymore, but I am very confident that this was not an approved use for transmission of classified data. You have very, very specific and expensive end-to-end encryptors on lines of communication that involve classified data, because this data is classified in terms of lives and lives lost and the potential for lives lost. And that's why you have to take this stuff extremely seriously. Any normal person would either get fired, possibly jailed for doing anything like this. And the fact that they were using this without authorization and so incompetently is already a problem. But that, on top of the fact that they had it set to erase the records thereof, removes all accountability. And accountability is one of the most important things when it comes to classified information, because otherwise you can't prove who saw that information, which puts people at risk, or who they sent it to, which removes any ability to hold anyone accountable, catch spies, catch insiders, or anything. So no matter what they tell you, this was a complete debacle and only speaks to their gross incompetence at best, assuming that they're not actual agents working against us.
Yeah, that is extreme incompetence. And the fact that he somehow added a journalist from the Atlantic to the group
well, that's
chat.
just hilarious. But
yeah, I don't know what that guy was thinking. Now, what gets me is the hypocrisy. So remember in 2016 with Hillary, it was the whole issue with her email servers, which I'm assuming that was negligent as well.
Absolutely,
of them
it was.
to do that.
The people who wave away Hillary are wrong, because she also did the wrong thing. She also got special treatment compared to any of us regular peons. And I have never been okay with that. But obviously, if you're looking at the scale of it, it's a completely different scenario. She was doing that as part of her duty. And I believe when she said that this was considered a standard practice for the executives of the State Department, it shouldn't have been, but it probably was. So it's not like she was doing it on purpose. This was intentional. Signalgate was intentional. They chose to use back channels that were not secure and had a short shelf life where records were destroyed after a period of time. All of that speaks to, like I said, incompetence at best.
Yeah. One thing that's also been in the news a lot is this whole thing about TikTok and concerns about foreign influence. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Recently it was banned, and then it was banned for like 12 hours, and then they reversed it. So what's your whole take on the whole TikTok ban?
Well, they're actually right. Yeah. They're actually right. When we allow foreign companies and governments to take a large control of our virtual space, our physical space, the land purchasing, how much of America is still owned by America, for example, it becomes a problem. It becomes a security risk, a livelihood risk, a fragility, essentially. So, for example, if you have TikTok and there are 100,000 Americans who are making a living through that because it allows for that, I suppose, then it becomes a point of control for that people who own that tool. Sort of like how Twitter went way down the tubes when Elon took over, because then he could control what information people saw and manipulate the reality of people by spreading constant lies, constant misinformation, boosting extremist groups, and while suppressing people who were fact-checking and truth. That's a huge problem. So we do have to keep some awareness of who owns it and what their intentions are. And some level of regulation, I think, is appropriate for public good, if nothing else.
Yeah. Was there actually any foreign influence, or was it just like
on what, TikTok?
Because my theory was that they were making more money than Facebook and Google, and that's why they got shut down. Was there actually, was China actually doing anything nefarious with TikTok?
Well, yes, they were, because everything China it touches involves spying and data collection to every extreme possible. So that's a given. Whether or not they were doing anything worse, I don't know. What you said is true. Maybe they went after it for money, but that doesn't mean they were wrong about the foreign influence and the risk that it creates. So regardless of the other parts of that and the other politics involved, the security part was at least right. As an example, in the Seattle area, there's an immense amount of commercial and even residential properties that are owned by China and foreign investors. That creates a risk as well, because how do we deal with that then when there is political strife and all of this land is owned by a foreign company, a foreign country even?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember reading somewhere they said like a lot, I don't know if it's a majority, but definitely a lot of farmland in America is owned by China. And when I remember learning that, I was like, wow, that's really kind of crazy. I didn't even know that was possible, you know?
Yeah, because
And
that ownership gives them the right to complain about us, say, the laws that we pass on our own lands, the control that we have on our own lands. If we try to take that land back from them, then is that an act of war? I don't know, but it certainly justifies it more.
yeah, I want part of me wonders if it should be even allowable. I know that's kind of might be a controversial thing to say,
I don't think
but
it's controversial at all, because if I'll give you an example. If I
mhm,
were going to attack the United States, food supply would be a really great way to do it.
yeah, that's for sure. We all got to eat, especially Americans. We're all obese.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but
Keep your
it's
belly
interesting.
down here where you can't see it.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you brought up the warfare because I wanted to touch on the whole cyber warfare thing. What would cyber warfare even look like? I have a hard time kind of, you know, imagining what that would look like in my head.
Well, basically, it would look like nothing. It would look like maybe you can't get to Amazon, or maybe the websites you typically go to are down, or maybe the internet's just slow today. And all of that is happening because we're being attacked right now. And it could be that they're taking down the industry. They could be trying to get into the system. They could be extorting them. It could be espionage, or they could be going after our critical infrastructure, because we have been putting control systems for the electrical grid, the power lights, and banking online, where they're now vulnerable to the world. So a lot of time, you're not even going to know what's happening. You're only going to see the aftermath if they decide to tell you, just like your
Yeah,
data breaches.
yeah, that's true. Um, so what are some cybersecurity threats that haven't happened yet, but are maybe coming down the line, like stuff that people wouldn't even consider happening?
Well, infrastructure for sure, and
Hmm.
and the fragility of government systems. The OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, they keep track of they're basically HR for a lot of the government, including intel agencies in some cases, or at least to some degree. And they got hacked because they were incompetent in this case and lost millions of records of military and what have you. And these records are very deep. They talk about your psych profiles, your health profiles, and all that jazz. And what can they do with that information? They can lean on people. They find those weak spots and then push on them. So it becomes an avenue for them to get more information, to turn people into essentially their agents against their will. And I realize this all sounds very movie plot, but the point is, with more information, that becomes less movie plot and more real, more potential.
Hmm. All right. So I
Especially if
got
they know you work in a very sensitive area with access that they want.
I got two more questions for you, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So, with this whole Trump administration, it seems like he's really tight with a lot of these tech bros like
Sure.
Zuckerberg, of course, Elon Musk, Bezos, just to name a few. What are your thoughts on these tech guys?
Well, for one, Trump's association with them isn't because they're tech, it's because they're rich.
Mhm.
And two, the conflict of interest is as clear as it could possibly be. And, things like man, gosh, that's deep.
Doge.
Look, there is nothing good about what's happening right now. The
Yeah.
The ideal US, one that is stable and will last and serves people, actually serves the people. The more power is in the hand of the masses, the safer and the better off we are. And the more of that is centralized into oligarchs and these these fancy CEOs, I don't know how to describe them exactly. The Elon Musks of the world, the worse off we are. It's as simple as it could be because the decisions that they make are whatever is best for them. They're not altruistic. The only one who even comes close is Bill Gates, because of his Bill and Melinda Foundation, which historically has done very good. But even he has profited off the backs of exploitation.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah. A lot of people are starting to cut ties with these tech companies. There's a whole de-Google movement.
as
Is
much as
that
you
even,
can, yes, that's a smart idea.
is it possible to really de-Google? Yeah,
Of
you
course,
know?
I mean, information goes stale. So something that was
Mhm.
true now may not be true later. So that information is less valuable over time. Plus, the more you use it, the more little bits of information, the more of your behavior is recorded, which gives a clearer picture than if they didn't have it. Now, I use Gmail and I probably won't stop, but I only use Gmail for certain kinds of emails. Remember that separation thing, right?
Yeah.
For mostly business things, things that
Mhm.
are not about my private life, not my medical. And I don't use Chrome. I won't use Chrome. I'd recommend nobody use Chrome.
All right. Good to know.
And
I
I
didn't I
do,
didn't know Chrome was that bad.
yeah, it's
I
bad.
thought Chrome was one of the better ones.
Chrome is a good browser. It's not good from a privacy perspective. I would not use Chrome.
Gotcha. All right.
Firefox, Brave, DuckDuckGo. I'd even use Edge before Chrome.
Oh wow. That's something. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I'm not a fan of Edge, but I would use it
Uh-huh.
before that.
Gotcha. All right, then. So I also just want to ask, how did working inside an agency like the NSA change your perception of the USA, if at all?
Well, actually, I was very nervous. I had anxiety about working for the NSA because I thought I was going to have to blow the whistle, go to the news, raise the flag, put up a flare about all the abuses I thought I would see, and it really bothered me. I was really scared, to be honest. And what I found was instead of all of the abuses I thought were going to happen in terms of our liberties, our privacy, etc., instead it was just incompetence. It was straight up incompetence. They were keystone cops, like a gag movie, just falling over themselves, barely functional, limping along. It's like a warship made from cardboard that's leaking behind the facade on front. And so that's why in my book I say that the NSA, the threat that the NSA poses, is mostly theoretical, at least for now. The much, much bigger threat are the people that are attacking us right now: Facebook, Google, LexisNexis, ChoicePoint, and every other large company that focuses on getting your data so they can use it against you. One example: Facebook was testing ways to influence people's moods to make them sad or make them happy based on what they showed them on their page. And that's just downright evil. They defended it. They said, no, 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 it's fine. But I think I would hope that you would agree that that's beyond. That's not okay.
Yeah, it's not okay at all, man. And I wonder what the long term, like, how do we fight back against that in the long term?
It's
Because I feel like
regulation,
it's
my friend. It's the only thing that will save us.
what
This
will save us?
regulation. The
Oh,
only thing
regulation.
that will
Yeah.
save us, as much as people complain about the government and as much as the people might hate the government, we need it. Because if it's not there, who is going to stop the Elon Musks of the world, the Zuckerbergs of the world? Who? All right.
Mhm.
No, when people who were competent were in charge, even those billionaires were afraid of law enforcement and of the courts because they had reason to be.
See, I agree. We definitely need regulation. My thing is that these companies have billions of dollars and they can fund the politicians
Hmm.
and have them win campaigns, you
Yep.
know. And if those politicians who are in the pocket of these corporations get in office, well, then they'll shoot down any regulation. And
That is
so,
also correct. And the way we solve that is by term limits and lobbying limits, ban, in my opinion, and sunshine laws that make all of the money completely and forever visible. None of this, whatever act it was that made corporations people, which they're not. Basically, we need to start moving things in the right direction so it becomes extremely hard to buy the government instead of what we're doing, which is making it easier.
Exactly. It seems like the way things are going right now, we might not have a government. It seems like they're trying to tear this down. What do you think Trump is doing with this whole tariff thing? I know this technically isn't NSA or cybersecurity related, but I guess just as a going out question, what do you think his whole plan is?
When we're evaluating threats in OPSEC, we talk about their history, their doctrine, their capabilities. And Trump has the capability and his doctrine and his history. It makes it very clear that his motivation is what is good for me right now, like a goldfish, right? Doesn't really think too much about the past or the future, just right now, right in front of me, what will make things better for me. And that is how he bases his decisions. Now, recently somebody called me out on that because they said that he also exacts vengeance against people that have wronged him that he does not like. And I had not considered that because despite everything I know about Trump, I still just don't usually assume malice where incompetence can be. But malice is part of his history and his doctrine very clearly. So unless it is something that will serve him in terms of making him richer, making him more powerful, making him, stroking his ego, or making his enemies suffer, that is what guides his every action. So anything he does, it's based on that.
Gotcha. Yeah, man, we're in a real tight pickle. Hopefully, the American people can get out of this. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for coming back on. This has been very informative, and pretty sure my audience got a lot out of this too.
Awesome. I appreciate your time.
Hey, no problem. Take care.
All right, later.
All right, then. That's a wrap for this episode of Bright Brains, where curiosity meets conversation. If you enjoyed the ride, make sure to follow, rate, and review the show. It helps more minds find their way here. You can keep up with me on Facebook at Bright Brains Podcast, on Blue Sky at brightbrainspod.bsky.social, and last but certainly not least, Instagram at bright_brains_podcast. And remember, that's Bright Brains with a Z. So check me out for behind-the-scenes content, episode updates, and more thought-provoking discussions. Stay sharp, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time. Keep that brain bright.